professor, and I understand journalism a little bit more qualified. I want to introduce myself. Kilo Kalami, professor at the law school. I was happy to be invited to moderate and to have a conversation with particularly Professor Wendy Green. We both entered legal academia together, and she's just all around a phenomenal person, human being, scholar, and really activist and organizer. So we'll talk to her in a minute, but I thought perhaps Sarah and I could have a quick exchange about our thoughts about the panel, or like what interests us. And so for me, this conversation, I'll ground it in conversation of Black hair, something I've long thought about in entering, in fact, entering as a first-year student in law school, right? So at the time, I had natural hair, graduated from Spelman, and my senior year, I shaved it off and went natural. And so in going to a very conservative law school, Columbia Law School, as well as the profession of law being a conservative one, how I wore my hair, how it would be perceived in terms of how others would perceive me would land in the profession, in terms of employment, in terms of just walking through the classroom. The conversation about hair was always there in the subconscious. But also consciousness, something I brought to the forefront when I conscious about my hair. And part of me cutting my hair was to let go of her. Let go of her, get more of those hot, left too long, get a little scab on the side. I don't know if y'all have that, or hot pressing where your mama works in the right ear and it's got too close to the hot. I don't know y'all young folks, so you might not know about that. So for me, there's always been this relationship with hair. And so, of course, as a result of that, it came with me as I entered the working world. And so, I remember most poignantly when I was graduating law school, at that time I was thinking of locks in my hair. Does everyone know what locks are? You guys call them dreadlocks, I call them locks. The thought was, it was more common to have braids in a conservative environment, like in law school, but not so much locks. And so I remember at the time, I twisted the flat twist, so it didn't stand out, and then I could push it eventually into a ponytail, right? Because I went to one of the top law firms in New York, very conservative, free French, and I didn't want my hair, I wasn't sure how it would be perceived. So for me, this conversation hits home. And so I wanted to ask Sarah, of the younger generation, how this particular panel resonates with her colleagues' conversations, because I know for me, those conversations, they're less now, a little bit now that I'm a tenured faculty member at Hofstra, but still, right? So I'm outside. My style better about my style, right? But it is definitely a conversation I have with folks who are going to graduate, depending on where they're going. If they're going into public interest work, are they going into the law firm? And I don't tell people necessarily what you should do or not do, but I do set up a very realistic picture in terms of how it might be perceived. As woke as your generation is, the reality is the marketplace right now is generational. And so you got Gen X, you got baby boomers still there. So the question is, and someone might say, I don't want to have that conversation, but I just present it as something you can think about, even if you want to reject on what's the plan in this argument. And so with that, I wonder if you could share with our audience and Wendy, who's Professor Green, some of the thoughts you have with regards to kind of hair and what about that for you. And we are senior, so in an important workplace, what happened?
Yes, I do believe that it's very interesting and being right to people folks that Black hair.
Can't hear you. That will hold you to louder than telling that here.
The mic is not on.
This mic is on.
Can we take it out and get comfortable with it? How do we feel about that?
There we go.
Yes?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent, okay, fine.
Little Beyonce moment.
Floor is yours, Sasha.
I said Sasha on purpose, Sasha Fierce, and Beyonce fans out there, thank you. Thank you. Get your tickets now.
There. You're over.
I'm not talking loud enough.
You're not. So project.
Okay. So basically, being part of that WCB, we actually got back in a Black Hair Appreciation event just to appreciate women, actually Black people in general, and like just find a way to kind of like have people learn more about their hair types and their textures and just bring more awareness to it. So the thing that mainly interests me today is just finding out like how my hair will be perceived as I go into workers. Like I want to go into medical. So I'm a big person. I like to braid my hair a lot. I like to do protective styles. I'm a natural, I'm natural girly. So I just want to see how, I guess per se how I can, just appreciate my hair and not feel, like judged based on how I come to the environment. Like even being on campus and like doing my hair, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of maintenance. Like being in the bathroom, like it's just like, you can't really spend too much time in a public bathroom because you have people coming in and out. So it's just like finding a way to, just be comfortable in my own space, be comfortable like being me and just taking care of myself how I see fit. Like wash day is a whole journey. Like that's a day. That's not even a couple hours, that's a day. So just figuring out how to be in a space like Hofstra, which is a predominantly Black institution, and just just get comfortable being here and just being able to appreciate myself and show my hair. That's what I can.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And I think that's a good point, right? Since many of us, because of acculturation and distancing ourselves from ourselves, our body, embodying ourselves, that includes our hair. So understanding how to take care of it without the default, no judgment, for the department, I'm just saying, without falling back on the default, what we was told and taught was the standard. How do we tease out? It was a big thing for me to learn, like, oh, we need to take more moisture in our hair, depending on if you're 4B, 4A, 4C, who knew, right? What does all that mean, right? And so, conversation is timely. What I'd like to do is begin my introduction of Professor Wendy Green. Because while you are embracing your beautiful selves as it relates to your hair and show up in the world as you are, as an expression of yourself, particularly as it relates to your hair in whatever way you decide, a foundational and fundamental question to me in the workplace, once you guys be working, is the ways in which the law may be involved in that conversation, right? In terms of how your employer might or might not treat you given your hairstyle or your hair texture, right? And so Professor Green has been a huge advocate in this movement, the Crown Act movement, and I'll tell you a little bit about her brief bio, and then I'll turn it over to I don't know if there's gonna be a video after this.
Yep.
2 videos, so should I introduce Professor Green first, or do you want to show the videos? Okay, Professor Green, 1 second, and then we'll.
You ever hear the one about a girl who walks into a bar?
Or a poetry show, minding her own business, then here comes you. Or you.
I can see it from a mile away.
Same look in their eyes, and I know exactly what's coming.
Men and women.
Black and white.
All an equally inquisitive bunch.
Yeah. That's what they are. Inquisitive.
Their ability to be inappropriate beats out their common sense every time.
Slicing through the crowd coming straight for me. I look away, staring at my cell phone, praying that it rains.
Looking for anybody to save me.
But no one is ever there to save me. They already know what they're going to say.
We already know what they're going to
And
say.
they just have to say it. Lucky me to be the one they say it to. It always starts with, your hair is so pretty. Which is always followed by, can I touch it?
And this is a question starting. How'd you do that to it?
Can I touch it? But look at all that hair.
How long did it take to do that?
Is it done?
Can I touch it?
Your hair is so soft.
How did it get so soft?
How many bundles did you use?
I don't even know what the bundle is.
I'll explain to you after the show. I'll bet you can do a lot with that. I bet it could be pretty. So you can go in the rain, right?
So like you can go swimming, right?
I don't know what that
understand those
means.
questions like that.
Rain is natural and you're water
Most of the
protected.
world is made of water.
It happens to you. Well, why are you trying to cut your hair? If you do, then you'll look just like us.
Then what will make you special?
Can I touch it?
Girl, you look just like Whoopi Goldberg.
Is you from Jamaica?
Or the Caribbean.
Some island, right? Your hair is so long.
You must be mixed with something.
You must have it in your family. Can I touch it? Girl, I can only imagine your hair straight. If my hair looked like yours, I'd be natural, but I got that nappy hair. Nobody wants to see
You
that.
got that good hair though. Is it all yours?
I thought black girls didn't grow long hair.
Can I touch you?
It's so thick.
And thought-provoking. Can I pick at you?
Or pet you.
Can I make you the minority I mock today?
Ask empty questions, the answers to which you will not receive.
See how many assumptions you can make before you walk away from
I really just want you to walk away.
who anybody can
Let's see how quickly you show how little you know.
It has never been my job to educate you.
I have never been here for you.
I was not thinking of you when I looked in the mirror this morning.
I own myself. What else do we have for you to take? I said everything about us be beautiful.
Be a balled up fist fit for an afro,
Be a lock,
a kink,
a curl,
cornrow,
none of which I have to explain to you. Or let you touch. So no, you cannot touch it.
but gee, thanks for asking.
Thanks, guys.
Alright, 2 snaps in a circle, so I'm gonna welcome myself to the microphone. I'm Dean Hickory, for those of you who don't know me, and one of the co-facilitators of this event. And so to transition between the media presentations, we just wanna kind of set up how we're gonna have the discussion today. So we have a series of engaging videos like the one we just saw, and then wonderfully engaging panelists today, of one of which the panel will be moderated by Professor Falami, 2 snaps in a circle for Professor Falami, right? One of our lovely student leaders, Sarah. We also have Professor Wendy Green, who was one of the co-founders of the Crown Act. Let's clap for her. Give me a round. We have Professor Vega with us, who is one of our Czar Business School alumni and one of our beauty industry experts, but currently working with the
Function of beauty.
Function of beauty. Thank you. I was going to say standard of beauty because you are the standard of beauty now. Let's clap for her too. And we have one of our our Center for Career Design and Development extraordinaires. We have with us Michelle Grayson, who is going to be talking about here in the workplace. So to kick us off and to lay another visual foundation for Professor Green's talk, we are going to watch another video, and then Professor Falami will introduce Professor Green.
Much as I've had for most of my childhood. However, Mr. Speaker, it has come to my attention that there are young girls here in Canada and other parts of the world who are removed from school or shamed because of their hairstyle. Mr. Speaker, body shaming of any woman in any form from the top of her head to the soles of her feet is wrong. Irrespective of her hairstyle, the size of her thighs, the size of her hips, the size of her baby bump, the size of her breasts, the size of her lips, what makes us different makes us unique and beautiful. So, Mr. Speaker, I will continue to rock these braids for 3 reasons. Number 1, because I'm sure you agree, they look pretty dope. Number 2, in solidarity with women who have been shamed based on their appearance. And number 3, and most importantly, in solidarity with young girls and women who look like me and those who don't. I want them to know that their braids, their dreads, their super curly afro puffs, their weaves, their hijabs, and their headscarves, and all other variety of hairstyles belong in school, in the workplace, in the boardroom, and yes, even here on Parliament Hill. Thank you.
So I'm tasked with introducing the speakers. I'll do the introductions, and our panelists will speak, and then after each one, we'll have a series of questions and open up to you guys. So Professor Wendy Green is the daughter of American civil rights activist. Doris Wendy Green is a trailblazing U.S. anti-discrimination law scholar, teacher, and advocate who has devoted her professional life's work to advancing racial, color, and gender equity in the workplace and beyond. The first tenured African-American woman law professor at Drexel University, Drexel University's Thomas R. Klein School of Law, and director of the Klein Law Center of Law, Policy, and Social Action. Professor Green's award-winning legal scholarship and public advocacy have generated civil rights protections for those who experience discrimination in various spheres. She is an internationally recognized civil rights scholar and activist. It was also the legal architect of the Federal Crown Act, CROWN Act, which stands for Creating a Respectful World for Natural Hair, and parallel civil rights legislation on municipal and state levels throughout the United States. Her internationally recognized global activism on this and other civil rights issues has shaped the enforcement and stance of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, legislators, federal courts, administrative law judges, as well as civil and human rights organizations. She's a native of Columbia, South Carolina, a graduate of Xavier University, and Tulane School of Law, as well as George Washington University School of Law. And without further ado, I turn the mic and attention to Professor Green.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Kalami, and thank you, Sarah, and all those who have organized this really important conversation. I'm sorry I'm unable to be with you in person, but I am so just filled with joy to be able to be here, at least virtually, and talk a little bit about the legal impetus for federal civil rights legislation, popularly known as the Crown Act, but also state and municipal level legislation that is really aimed at ensuring that all of the deliberations, or at least trying to diminish many of those deliberations that Professor Kalami was talking about as it relates to how we're going to show up in the workplace, and namely how we're going to wear our hair, to try to address, if not redress, when it does occur, what I call the hyper-regulation of Black people's bodies vis-a-vis our hair, and really trying to redress and prevent the kinds of harms and consequences, and often what I call invisible harms and consequences of natural hair discrimination, especially as it relates to African descendant women and girls. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background as it relates to why we need this legislation, I think most of us in this room or in your room probably appreciate the systematic nature of racial discrimination on the basis of African descendants, natural hairstyles, and hair textures. But oftentimes people don't really understand the ways in which our lawmakers, those who are charged with enforcing and interpreting our civil rights laws, have treated this kind of systemic discrimination. So at the height of the 20th century civil rights movement, Congress passed several pieces of federal legislation that specifically redressed the long-standing racial exclusion, subordination, and segregation Americans of African descent face in spheres like employment, housing, voting, education, and public accommodations. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, in particular, is continuously held as one of Congress's crowning glories. With Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Congress sought to remove arbitrary barriers to Black Americans' equal access to employment opportunities and their corresponding economic security and enjoyment of freedom. Not too long after Congress enacted this historic piece of civil rights legislation, we see African descendant workers challenging workplace prohibitions or bans against their natural hairstyles like afros and braids. And they're challenging this kind of discrimination as a form of racial discrimination and violation of Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, among other federal civil rights statutes. But beginning in 1981, federal courts started to declare Title VII's protections against race discrimination, as well as national origin discrimination, was limited to discrimination on the basis of immutable characteristics. And you might say, what are immutable characteristics, Professor Green? Well, how the courts have defined this is that these are characteristics with which one is born, characteristics one cannot change, characteristics that are difficult to change, or characteristics shared by all or only individuals who identify as a member of a particular racial or ethnic group. Now, newsflash, there is no physical characteristic that a person cannot change, nor is there one characteristic that all people who identify with a particular racial group possesses. So, for example, a person who might identify as white can be born with an afro, right? Or something that might be perceived as one. Similarly, a person who might identify as African descendant or Black may have a light skin complexion or white skin complexion. And these are like really critical markers of racial identity, or these socially and politically constructed markers of racial identity that we oftentimes perceive as being only possessed by these particular individuals based upon their racialized grouping. But there is not one. But nonetheless, in 2023, or 2023 now, marks the 42nd year that this misinformed view of race has restricted the scope of federal civil rights protections against discrimination on the basis of locks, braids, twists, and other natural protective hairstyles African descendants commonly wear. For 4 decades, according to the strict application of what is known as the immutability doctrine, federal courts have ruled that if an employer fires a Black woman because she wears an afro, this adverse employment decision would constitute unlawful racial discrimination. The reasoning is that afros are an immutable racial characteristic of Blackness. Or another way of thinking about it, they think that afros, that Black people only are born with afros, and if you are born with an afro, that must mean you're Black. But we know that's not true, right? And more recently, we've had a federal court declare that afros constitute an immutable hair texture versus a changeable hairstyle like locks. Accordingly, once a Black woman locks, braids, or twists her afro and is terminated for doing so, this adverse employment decision does not constitute unlawful race discrimination. So another way of thinking about it is that if you're rocking your afro and you're discriminated against, then that would constitute unlawful race discrimination under our federal civil rights laws. But that same Black woman who might be wearing an afro, if she decides to lock it, braid it, or twist it, or wear any other kind of natural protective hairstyle, and is terminated for doing so, this adverse employment decision does not constitute unlawful race discrimination. According to federal courts, natural hairstyles that are not afros are mutable cultural characteristics that an employer is free to regulate, since federal civil rights laws do not prohibit discrimination on the basis of culture. So what does this mean in the real world? Essentially, employers are free to demand that African descendant men and women change their natural hairstyles as a condition of employment, which is often the case. Employers are also free to discipline, harass, and deprive Black workers promotions and related compensation for simply donning their hair as it naturally grows, unless it is an afro. In the 21st century, employers, among other private and public decision makers, systematically engage in race-based natural hair discrimination. African descendant women, girls, men, and boys are regularly denied educational opportunities, employment for which they are qualified, housing to which they are legally entitled, as well as access to public accommodations simply on the basis of their natural hairstyles, without legal recourse under federal civil rights statutes, unless again they are discriminated against for donning an afro. This gap in civil rights protection is unjustifiable to me, and this is what triggered my advocacy in this space. This hair-splitting legal distinction that federal courts have created, and that has basically resulted in the lawful discrimination, the lawful racial discrimination on the basis of African descendants' hairstyles and hair textures, except for an afro. So in 2019, California, under the leadership of former State Senator Holly J. Mitchell, took a critical step in curing this inequity by becoming the first state to sign into law the Crown Act, or what is also known as the Creating a Respectful and Open Workplace or World for Natural Hair Act. And I had the privilege of serving as a legal expert and testifying on behalf of this legislation in California. Since 2019, 20 states and over 30 municipalities have passed parallel civil rights legislation that really makes clear that natural hair discrimination is racial discrimination. Now, I have to admit, it should not take legislation to declare African descendants human right to wear their hair how it naturally grows, or to express a fundamental feature of their racial, cultural, or even religious identity. Indeed, African descendants' hair texture and hairstyles have been and continue to be a positive reflection and affirmation of empowerment, pride, joy, inspiration, resistance, resilience, alongside religious, cultural, and creative expression. However, like one's skin color, African descendant people's natural hairstyles have also served as a basis of African descendants' racial enslavement, their segregation, stigmatization, and discrimination, not only throughout the United States, but around the world, and unfortunately, since we've arrived on this land in most cases, involuntarily so, forcibly, and brutally so. Natural hairstyles like our darker skin color are commonly, historically, and contemporarily associated with Blackness or African ancestry or African heritage, and have served as a marker of such. Yet, unlike racial discrimination on the basis of skin color or on the basis of our parentage known or perceived or our ancestry known or perceived, race-based natural hair discrimination has remained lawful for centuries. Indeed, it is a contemporary nationwide problem that requires a contemporary nationwide solution. And the Federal Crown Act provides just that. Introduced in the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate in December of 2019, the Federal Crown Act, I'm sorry for the background noise, welcome to Big City Life. The Federal Crown Act was passed by the United States House of Representatives in September 2020 and reintroduced this year. And the Federal Crown Act makes clear that racial and national origin discrimination is not simply animated by skin color, but also other characteristics, and namely hair textures and hairstyles that are commonly associated with racial or ethnic identity. Therefore, while it seeks to redress systemic racial discrimination that African descendants endure when donning natural hairstyles in workplaces, housing, public accommodations, and federally funded institutions like schools. This civil rights legislation provides a clarifying definition of race, which protects against racial discrimination and its myriad manifestations. This clarifying definition of race, for many of you, especially if you're not in the legal profession, you might say, well, why does that even matter? Why do we even need a definition of race? Well, to be clear, this clarifying definition of race is in fact groundbreaking because most of our civil rights laws do not even have a definition of our protected statuses and classifications like race. So in my 2008 article entitled Title VII, What's Hair and Other Race-Based Characteristics Got to Do with It, in light of the fact that our federal courts were interpreting this definition of race in a very narrow way, so as to continue racialized discrimination on the basis of mutable characteristics like our hairstyles, I proposed a definition of race that namely courts and other lawmakers could use as they are enforcing our protections against racial discrimination. Specifically, I advanced that racial discrimination should and does in fact consist of discrimination on the basis of characteristics that are historically, commonly, and presently, or just simply associated with a particular racial group, like one's skin complexion, like our hair textures, our hairstyles, our clothing, our accents, our language, our names, where we're residing, our educational institutions, and so forth. And that civil rights laws should reflect this reality. Lawmakers, thankfully, now have listened and have adopted iterations of my published definition of race in civil rights legislation, popularly known as Crown Acts. As a legal scholar on the front lines of the 21st century civil rights movement to end race-based natural hair discrimination, and to be clear, this is a movement long in the making. I'm not the first person, and I pretty much see that I won't be the last person. But I'm hopeful that in future generations that this kind of discrimination can, if not be eliminated, but severely diminished. But as a legal scholar on the front lines of this 21st century civil rights movement to end race-based natural hair discrimination in workplaces and other spaces, I can attest that progress is being made, yet there is still more work to be done. For nearly 15 years, I have published an authoritative body of legal scholarship on what I have coined as Coast discrimination, and specifically around race-based natural hair discrimination. I've traveled across the United States in 4 continents, raising public awareness around race-based natural hair discrimination and its harms, including most recently during the United States' first session of the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent in Geneva, Switzerland. Really calling on the body to really to recognize and appreciate that natural hair discrimination is a global form of discrimination, a systematic form of discrimination that African descendants are experiencing and needs to be redressed. I have also served as a legal expert and consultant for civil rights cases challenging natural hair discrimination as race discrimination in violation of our federal civil rights laws, as well as the Constitution. In particular, I'm serving as an expert in a case now brought by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund on behalf of DeAndre Arnold and his cousin Katie Bradford in Houston, Texas. Some of you might be familiar with that case where DeAndre was told that he couldn't participate in graduation unless he cut off his locks. And they both were essentially expelled from school because of their refusal to do so. For the first time in my knowledge, a federal district court has actually declared that the implementation of this grooming policy that bars male students from having hair that has the propensity to touch their shoulders is let down. That they have presented an actual claim of sex discrimination in violation of the 14th Amendment. They have presented an actual claim of race discrimination in violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And they have presented an actual claim of an infringement upon their cultural expression and racial identity in violation of the First Amendment. So I just also wanted to point that out is because we get a lot of fanfare around the civil rights legislation that is seeking to combat race-based natural hair discrimination, but the litigation ensues, and it's equally as important as the legislation and other legal reforms that in this space. And to that point, I have served as a legal expert for over 20 pieces of civil rights legislation, including the Federal Crown Act, which, as I mentioned before, has been passed twice in the United States House of Representatives and is now being reintroduced because of a Senate blockage just in December. So this body of legal scholarship and public advocacy have really culminated in an internationally recognized hashtag and campaign known as the hashtag Free the Hair Movement. And indeed, the sentiments expressed by former Canadian MP Selena Cesar-Chavana.
Professor Green, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Can we ask also one to create space to ask questions, where I'm sure you can further elaborate. So can we open up to questions now and then kind of flow with, adding in addition?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I was just wrapping up.
Sorry, wrap it up, you think?
No, we're wrapping it up. I was just going to say free the hair.
Free the hair, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent, free the hair, right? So Professor Green laid out the legal landscape as it relates to the regulation of Black women, or black hair, really, right? And so we want to open it up to any questions. I can lead with the first question, or does anyone have a question? Yeah, they'd like to ask?
Hi, my name is Dominique. I'm a junior here, and I just wanted to see if you could provide an overview of the Black hair care industry. Okay, so for the Crown Act privilege, one's group and cultural style in the workplace, how does that play a part? So based on like colorism, light skin versus dark skin women, how does that play a part in the overall workforce?
How does colorism in and of itself, or how does
colorism? Specifically different hair textures such as like 4A, 4C, 4B, 3C.
Sure. So, I've seen cases where individuals probably are engaging in not only texturism, but also colorism at the same time, based upon ideas of, what particular natural hair textures are considered to be, say, good hair, or bad hair, for that matter, or what particular hair textures might be perceived as being more professional, or less professional, or less attractive, or less beautiful, and so forth. And so there are definitely manifestations of both not only texturism, but also colorism in cases involving natural hair discrimination. But I'm just thinking, if I've necessarily seen allegations of full color and race discrimination, even if that may be operating simultaneously. I don't believe I have, frankly, and it's not to sit here and say that that wasn't what was going on, but I think it's a really important point in terms of the interaction between full colorism and texturism as it relates to not only natural hair discrimination, but also as it relates to the ways in which African-descended people, as well as other people of color, are being discriminated against in the workplace on the basis of their appearance. So, for example, I've seen cases where, say, a black woman who is donning blonde hair is being told that she can't rock her blonde hair because that's not that's not something that is natural to black people, is the perception. But I've also seen it involved where a person who was an African-descended supervisor who was wearing Afrocentric garb and told a lighter-skinned black woman who was wearing blonde hair and a straightened hairstyle that she was a wannabe. And basically advised her that she needed to look more like her. And ultimately, when she refused to change her hair texture and her hairstyle from, say, straightened hair to maybe, a natural hairstyle, like locks or braids or twists, that she was ultimately terminated. So we're seeing it play itself out in a lot of different ways, even beyond, say, natural hair discrimination in terms of colorism and texturism. And I think you're really raising a really important point, and an important point in terms of how many of us are still thinking about how to advocate for this legislation that is very much intersectional in nature, this kind of advocacy, and the ways in which oftentimes some of these bills are written to address both of those things that are operating. Or multiple things that are operating.
And Professor Green, we have a question from someone in the audience, a young one among us. I'd like to throw the mic to her, and then we'll wrap up with you and move on to the other. Can you see we have a young baby? Sorry. In the audience with some beautiful
I can't see. No, but I love it when the babies are there.
Hello, my name is Tiana. I'm 10 years old. I wanted to ask, has anybody ever said something rude about your hair, and if so, how did you act?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Has anybody ever said something weird about my hair? Well, I have to say that I have not, at least to my face, I have not heard anybody say anything extremely derogatory or extremely weird. Other than, sometimes people might ask me, especially when I was wearing my hair naturally curly, they might say, how did you get your hair like that? Trying to figure out and thinking that, straight was the natural way, or how I was born versus my curly hair texture. And kind of somebody alluded to Beyonce earlier, and I just basically had to tell them, this is how I woke up. I woke up like this. I didn't have to do anything as it relates to that. In terms of sometimes, I will have to say, I get, thankfully, a lot of celebration and affirmation, many positive compliments about my hair, as opposed to a lot of comments as it relates to maybe it being weird or being distracting or not beautiful. And frankly, the work that we're doing is try to ensure that everyone starts to really declare and appreciate that all hair is good hair.
Excellent. Sorry, Professor Green, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you for letting the legal man speak for what we are going into as it relates to the workplace. Thank you very much for making time on your busy schedule. What we'd like to do now is move to our next panelist, Rebecca Vega. You want to do it? I'll play a video first. Making sure you're awake.
This is like a Star Wars trailer. Read it and then comes to action.
We spoke up and we don't know organic, and so PNG like us back on the right. And so
Those who just started the company and building it up to a mainstream success is a goal achieved by a small number of people. Not only do you have to have hype around your brand, but you must also, most importantly, have an amazing product that actually works. Once your brand reaches the peak of success and popularity, the offers to scoop up your company and all that you've worked hard to create and expand start rolling in. For many, the offer could be life-changing and just too good to say no. But for others, it could be the death of their company and their legacy altogether. We see it all the time in many industries. Instagram sold to Facebook, Sprint sold to T-Mobile, Spirit Airlines sold to JetBlue. But when it comes to cult favorite hair care brands, consumers tend to lose respect for the original owners and they get labeled as sellouts. Many changes occur once the brand is acquired by a large conglomerate group that alienates the original intended consumer, like formulation changes, target audience marketing, price increases, and sometimes overall the quality of the product is affected. Mayella Organics, which was founded in 2014, was recently acquired by P&G Beauty, a division of the consumer packaging goods conglomerate, for an undisclosed sum. The brand will continue to be led by Monique and her husband Melvin, and will operate as an independent subsidiary of P&G Beauty. Recently, Mayella was a topic of conversation as women who were not of color were promoting using the brand. Many were upset because they felt Mayella was being gentrified.
Now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching, and right now it's this new viral social media trend surrounding this very popular beauty product that's kicking off a new conversation around race. Mayella's hair oil is meant to make hair thicker, make it grow more. It's designed specifically for Black women and women with thicker, curlier hair. But recently, popular white influencer Alex Earl posted about how well it's working for her, and some people think that is why the product is selling out, empty shelves in stores. There's a concern now about whether this product is going to change to accommodate a new demographic. Zingle Asamoah has the story.
And with that, we will turn to our next panelist, and so I will read really quickly the bio, and then after each presentation, we'll ask one question. Hopefully Professor Green can still stay with us, and then after the presentation, to one question, we'll circle back around with more Q&A. So for now, we have Rebecca Vega with us. Originally from Albany, New York, Ms. Vega received her bachelor's degree in marketing right here from Hofstra University, her master's in data mining and predictive analytics from St. John's University. Upon graduating, she spent 5 years working in client development and product development at the NPD Group with a core focus on luxury, fashion, and beauty. Her in-depth experience growing up in the market research world led her to pursuing a career in CPG at Unilever with a continued focus on data-driven insights. Rebecca spent 2 years leading category management for textured hair, providing thought leadership and strategic guidance as the cornerstone for growth within multicultural hair care products. She's also supported major retailers such as Walmart, Target, CVS, Walgreens, Dollar General, Family Dollar, Whole Foods, in addition to Unilever brands such as Shea Moisture, Dove, Suave, Nexus, and Tresemme. Her last position within Unilever focused solely on as the customer business manager of Ulta, Rebecca utilized her extensive background in consumer behavior insights to drive profitable sales growth across their omni-channel platforms. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Awesome. So I'm going to go a quick fast forward because I no longer work at Unilever. After 2.5 years there, I worked at Diva Curl for a year, and then I most recently joined Function of Beauty, where I'm currently the manager of marketing, product development, and innovation. So, before I get into my kind of spiel, and I've got a couple of slides that I'll take you guys through to guide my key talking points in the discussion, I need to react to that video, right? There was a lot there that we can unpack, so I was taking notes because just even figuring out where to begin, there's a lot. But I'm gonna start with the word sellout, or rather phrase, if you will, right? And so, I think, there's many leaders in the beauty industry. They showed a couple, with Carol's daughter. I worked with Shea Moisture as well, and now Mayel, being acquired by a CPG or a larger organization within the beauty space, right? CPG stands for Consumer Packaged Goods. So I'll use Unilever as an example. They acquired Shea Moisture, but Unilever also happens to own an ice cream business where they own Ben & Jerry's, and they own all those awesome, ice creams that you can buy from the ice cream truck because they own Good Humor. They have a tea business where they own Tazo and Lipton. They have a savory business where they own Hellmann's, et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of get an idea that these are massive conglomerates, but they also have portfolios. They happen to have a beauty portfolio and acquired Shea Moisture. So I want to go back to Shea Moisture as a specific example, and then I'll pivot to Mayel. The term sellout, right? What exactly does that mean? As I interpret it, and really to unpack that, it means you were doing something great for the community. As soon as you started to make it, you took a check, and then you bounced, right? And so I want to be really clear that does happen sometimes, right? If you are an entrepreneur, regardless of your skin color, you are absolutely entitled to grow your business, take a check, and retire early, because that means you did it. That means you accomplished exactly what you were trying to accomplish. You started with nothing, and you proved your business was worth significant value such that you sold it to someone who not only believed in your business and the future opportunities for your business, but was willing to put their money where their mouth is and present you with a dollar figure that you felt was appropriate in order to sell your business. Now, going back to the word sellout, right? Second half of that phrase is out, right? Which means I'm out, peace, let me take my money, go on vacation, retire, what have you. There's brands like Shea Moisture where the founder, Richard Dennis, or even Mayel, aren't actually selling out, right? They're selling in. So they've created something with their bare hands, which again, in the beauty space, typically happens in a kitchen, and they're starting to test and experiment with products on their friends and their family and on themselves. It started with love inside of a kitchen and expanded to a massive business that really supported a following, that was able to find successful formulas with efficacy. I'm going to use that word a couple of times. So efficacy, all you need to know about that term, if you're not familiar with it, means it works. It works well, it does what it's supposed to do, it is efficacious. So all of these brands, in order to get to this place where they're selling out, have proven that their products work, have proven that their products have value, have proven that their products have great ratings and reviews and strong consumer experiences and are worth something, right? And so you have brands or even founders of brands like Monique and Melvin Rodriguez from Mayel, or like Richard Dennis, who continue to stay involved. I'll speak a little bit more to Shea Moisture because that's, again, from my experience being at Unilever, where I have a much closer connection to. But the business was acquired, and so when a business becomes acquired, there is a large sum of money that essentially goes in to estimate the value of the business. I don't know how many of you maybe watch Shark Tank here and there, but it's a great show that can, have an opportunity to bring in an investor and someone becomes a partner with you in your business, or sometimes people can offer to buy a company. When someone offers to buy a company, and at Unilever they use this phrase, 1 + 1 = 3. Now I know everyone in this room, even the 10-year-old knows 1 + 1 = 2. So when I first heard that phrase, I'm like, I don't get what you're talking about, what does that mean? And essentially all it means is that there is strength in numbers. So the ability to scale your business on your own, by yourself, with a small staff, with a small factory, you can grow, you can do it. But it depends on what's most important to you. And everyone as an entrepreneur has to ask themselves, is my goal to have complete ownership of this business for the end of all time and be able to hand something to my children someday and then they themselves run this business and we keep it in the family? Or is my goal to be able to make an impact on the world? Can I take my business and scale globally to more countries around the world and change more lives as a result of partnering with someone, right? 1 + 1 = 3. Can I then create generational wealth for my family as a result of this valuation of my company and continue to be involved in the future of the organization? So that second route ended up being what Richard Dennis was doing with Shea Moisture. So I don't know how many of you guys, raise your hand if you've ever used a Shea Moisture product in here. Okay, beautiful. So I'm sure a lot of you probably know the color of the product that you use, because each collection is specifically color coded. But within each collection, there are primary ingredients that are used. And those ingredients are actually sourced from co-ops in Africa. So they actually are working specifically with shea butter as a great example. If there is shea butter inside of your formula, it is sourced responsibly and fairly. They are paying women fair wages. They are investing in communities for development. And so not everybody knows that when they buy a bottle of Shea Moisture shampoo, curl enhancing smoothie. Not everybody knows that, but that story is written on the back of every bottle. And so by being able to get millions of dollars funneled into the business, Richard Dennis said, I can make a bigger impact on the world. I can focus more on the value of the community and really expanding out our efforts, because some brands are a brand with a mission, and other brands are a mission with a brand. So I just want to be really clear that selling out doesn't always mean selling out. There can be a continued investment and a level of involvement. That means that the founders continue to focus on the future of the brand, maintaining its quality, so on and so forth. I'm going to keep it moving because I know I still have a 5-minute mark. There's a couple other things that I want to unpack as well. So we're just going to jump right into this because I think it was a question that came up. So specifically, if you're trying to think about why do people care about the black hair business, why is this something that's become a recent topic of conversation? This is an underserved yet powerful group, and people are really starting to understand that more recently. Black hair care is the top category within the beauty space for Black consumers, with approximately $2.29 billion in annual spend. And that number specifically is in care products. That does not include services. That does not include the purchase of hair, whether it's bundles or anything that your wigs, weaves, etc. This is just products that you can buy on the shelf and scan them from a care perspective for your hair. So that number is understated. And the growth is significant as well. So I'm just gonna leave that number out there for a second as we start to think about that. And so, given that multi-billion-dollar figure, right, it continues to reinforce how important this business is for consumers, how much we value spending time on our hair, how much our hair is closely connected to our identity, and there's a spend associated with that. Consumers with textured hair actually spend 2 times more than consumers without textured hair, with straight hair. So there's a need for some of that in terms of using more product, using more conditioner. Nobody here uses a dime size. I am 100% confident in that statement. However, it also really comes down to your regimen and your product routine, right? And your hair constantly changing, or the products that you're trying constantly changing, and that never-ending hunt for the holy grail of all products. So there's really starting to become more of a moment to understand this and try and provide more solutions to be more equitable from an industry perspective. I'm gonna kind of keep it moving because I wanted to connect back to some of the things earlier that Professor Wendy Green was talking about. So a recent report was actually produced from Dove on black hair care, and specifically related back to the Crown Act, because I don't know if everybody here knows this, but Dove was one of the founding brands that supported the Crown Act. While I was working with Unilever and working with Dove, I actually went down to the New Jersey State Legislature and was a part of that moment where they passed the Crown Act. So this is very near and dear to my heart, and really is that kind of intersection between the legal side of the business, which we just heard about, but also the professional side of the business from a manufacturing perspective, from a beauty perspective. So I just wanted to kind of throw up a couple of stats here just to validate some of the things that were said before. So Black women's hair is 2.5 times more likely to be perceived as unprofessional. Bias against natural hair and protective styles can impact how Black women navigate the hiring process. 2/3 of Black women change their hair for a job interview. And among them, 41% change their hair from curly to straight. 54% of Black women are more likely to feel that they have to wear their hair straight to a job interview in order to be successful. This is half of an infographic, so I'm gonna keep going with the numbers. Black women with coily, textured hair are 2 times as likely to experience microaggressions in the workplace. Over 20% of Black women ages 25 to 34 have been sent home from their work because of their hair. With young Black professionals feeling the most pressure from hair discrimination, nearly half of Black women under the age of 34 feel pressured to have a headshot with straight hair. 25% of Black women believe they have been denied a job interview because of their hair. And even higher, 1/3 of Black women for ages 25 to 34. So you can start to see, how kind of all of these real numbers validate the experiences that you may have had or have heard of or felt. It's not just an individual experience. This study was actually done with 3,000 people, Black, Hispanic, and white as well, in order to be able to validate these numbers. So just to kind of wrap things up, because I think, they did a great job with my bio. I could talk to you guys all day long, and I hope you guys have some good questions, because there's still a ton of things that I want to keep talking about. But I can say, just from my experience working at a research company, who actually their expertise is quantifying the number of sales for the year, quantifying the trends, and really trying to understand the opportunities and grow the business, to now being on a hair care brand and being responsible for innovation and the development of future hair care products to serve consumers of all hair types and textures. My words of advice that I'm going to try and wrap things up with is, blending in is not your superpower, standing out is. I'll open it up for questions.
We open the floor for at least one question.
If you don't have questions, I'll keep talking.
I have a question.
Yes.
So first, I just want to say thank you for this panel. I think you all have done. I think you've done a great job of presenting like a useful framework, right? Of the ways in which hair is experienced through the sort of professionalization lens, right? Perception, right? How other people are perceiving Black hair, and then also how it's personalized, right? But I have a specific question for you, Rebecca Vega. How is the industry addressing some of the trauma and then some of, quite frankly, our young people's desire to not really want to deal with some of the realities about what people perceive about their hair, the ways in which it can impede their ascension, their access to certain spaces? Like, is the industry offering some empowerment, uplifting language? If not, what should they be saying? And then how can we encourage our young people to really sort of tackle in their own way, right? Those elements of upliftment and empowerment around their hair.
Yeah, that's a great question. I know it wasn't one I was even think we would get a chance to talk about, so thank you so much for asking that question. I'll take it back to my experience at Unilever, because when I worked there, the simplest way to describe my title, the reason that they hired me, was I was an industry expert of curly hair. So within that, right, language became a big part of the responsibility. My job never existed before they brought me on the floor, so they just had an industry expert of hair. And so typically that person was not a person of color. Typically that person did not have straight hair, and so they kind of treated hair as an overall business. They ended up realizing that textured hair and Black hair and curly hair was just so unique that they really needed to find someone to hone in on the insights there. So Overall, we actually do a lot of language studies, and I'm sure Unilever is not the only company to do this, to understand what's the right language to be using. What words are you using to describe your hair? And they do a lot of social listening and web scraping, where they're scraping the internet on Twitter to see what you talk about. They're reading all of the comments on Instagram to see what you talk about. They're looking at the language that is used by you in order to understand what makes sense. How do you want to describe your hair? What do you want? What do you feel like is missing? So we'll do kind of a transition as a quick example of how that has changed. I'll use Walmart as an example, right? When you're shopping for hair care products in Walmart, you can go to what they call the daily hair care aisle, or you can go to the other aisle, right? And so it's been called multiple things. So this is where we're going to transition. So it used to be called black hair care. It used to be called ethnic hair care. It used to be called multicultural hair care. You'll now more commonly see it referred to as textured hair care. And there's been more of an evolution behind, this business being, this aisle being all the way in the corner near the toilet paper, not next to the rest of the hair products with security cameras or things locked up, right? To now being more incorporated into the total beauty section because Black consumers and consumers with textured hair are shopping multiple brands. They may be investing in a really good deep conditioning treatment or a styler, and maybe they're using a Tresemme or a Pantene as a shampoo, right? And so they're really starting to wake up and really understand how people are shopping because we're finally listening. Great question.
And with that was a wonderful teaser, what we hope will generate even more questions after we hear from our final panelist, Michelle Grayson. A quick introduction, a quick reading of her bio, is the Assistant Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Campus Partnership for the Center for Career Design and Development. Michele's work in student affairs began as a resident assistant while an undergraduate at SUNY College at Old Westbury, where she earned a bachelor's degree in marketing. She later pursued a Master's of Science in Higher Education Administration at Baruch College. She previously served as a career advisor for the MPA programs at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and currently teaches Introduction to Marketing at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. Her background also includes working for admissions at City of CUNY and as a first-year seminar instructor at Baruch College. Outside of her work with students, Michelle has also worked independently as a social media writer and content creator representing various brands. Having grown up in Brooklyn, New York, she enjoys blogging and sharing about her life experiences with the goal to inspire others to live meaningful lives. Without further ado. Oh, the video.
Hey, wasn't your hair different yesterday? Baby, I'm a Black woman. He said, wasn't your hair different yesterday? Baby, I'm a Black woman. My hair was different 5 minutes ago. Cause one thing about us, we gon' switch it and feel no ways about it. Might be curly at breakfast, straight for lunch, and braided at dinner, killing every style, of course, cause that's just how we do. So, yeah, my hair is different, but so is our style. A Black woman in her switch up be the best. You never know what she going with, so don't even try to guess. On Monday, she might have box braids with a honey blonde flare. Then on Tuesday, her coworkers talking about, oh my God, did you cut your hair? No, Susan, I just took my braids out, and tomorrow I might have a fro hawk. So get used to it, because every time I change my hair, I am not giving a TED talk. A Black girl is too blessed to be stressed. So she might rock her natural, but take a little break with a silk press. Folk be pressed, asking, is that your hair? Real blunt. But whether I grew it or I bought it, it's mine, so face front, don't front. A Black woman will kill it in a lace front. Our hair is part of the look, it's part of the stunt. Some Black girls switch out their hair like fresh cakes. The hair is part of the outfit, some might call it hat tricks, but it's all part of our Black girl magics. Rocking different styles is a right, it's a must. Trying to keep track of a Black woman's hair will leave you in the dust, so just admire the crown and try to keep up. Ain't nothing in this world like a Black girl and her switch up.
Hi everybody, I love that video. Like, mine is so many mouths in it because I saw it like 1,000 times. And I'm really happy to be a part of this panel because this topic is really near and dear to my heart. Just a quick story, like this is my 3rd semester working at Hofstra, and like a student sitting here and many of you, like I was burdened with a lot of anxiety about my hair, and working here, like I was thinking like, wow, nobody here would know me aside from my short buzz cuts. Like nobody would know me outside of like me having my hair, and like how would I be perceived here? This is a predominantly white institution. Will I be asked a lot of questions? I'm the only brown girl, full-time staff in my office, so I was burdened with this anxiety, and like I was happy to be welcomed with a lot of warmth and acceptance, and a lot of how I present myself, and just the presentations, and when I meet students, it is just for me to be a reflection of owning my identity, owning my hair, to be an example to students. But I do want to acknowledge and highlight that biasness in the workplace does exist, right? So like we all are, we all share the experience of holding that anxiety about like how should we wear our hair when we're going to interviews, when we're going like, you know, in workplaces and internship, and it comes from a real place. Like I'm happy that Rebecca has shared some nice statistics, because I was going to share some statistics too, and just do some history. Before I even get into that, like I really wish, I don't have a presentation, okay. But I really wish that that this conversation and this space was open to others in the community. I even wish that employers was here, because they need to hear these conversations surrounding professionalism, right? First of all, who gets to define what professionalism is, right? And let's make it clear. The standards of professionalism is rooted in anti-Blackness and white supremacy and systematic racism, right? So that's existed since the history of our country. First of all, Black hair in the workplace have been a topic of discussion or implemented in the workplace in days of slavery, where enslaved field workers had to wrap their hair, where maybe enslaved women who worked in the houses mimicked the hairstyles of their enslavers, right? So the conditions of our hair is rooted in the history of our country. So it makes sense that like years later, 2023, that we're still having this conversation and we're still weighed down, because it's systematic racism. It's how, you know, it's the way we're oppressed, right? However, I'm glad that we're bringing up and we're talking about the Crown Act, because the Crown Acts help us to acknowledge the inequities that Black people, people of color, Black women face in the workplace, right? So a study was done in Michigan that found that African American women face the highest instances of discrimination in the workplace because of their hair. Specifically, a separate study was done and due to demonstrate that like participants in the study felt that hairstyles that were in twists, braids, coils, curls, all of those, the participants looked at it as those hairstyles specifically were unprofessional. So again, it's like, these conversations I'm glad it's happening, but I wish we had some of our employers, our recruiters, our people that hire our students to like challenge the status quo of who gets to define what's professional or not, right? A common thing, a common conversation that students ask of me is, well, how should I wear my hair in an interview, right? I'm not one to like really police or tell you what you should and should not do. Do what you feel. Like if it was up to me, wear your hair how you want, right? But I think it's also important for folks to like really understand the fields that they're going into and what is the standard of that field, and whether you yourself could accommodate what that standard is. And then also acknowledge like even the privilege of even entering into certain workplaces too, right? Some of us don't necessarily have the privilege to like, well, I'm not gonna go on that interview. If they don't like me how I am, then I'm gonna go, because we have responsibilities, we have to pay our bills, we have to feed our families. Those are real realities for a lot of people that don't have the privilege of being picky and choosy on the jobs that you get to choose. And I wholeheartedly acknowledge that, and I think that that's something that we should be honest with and like really acknowledge, not only as a community, but bringing these conversations, like I said, to employers, bringing these conversations to our white colleagues or non-Black and brown colleagues about how the hair and, you know, our bodies and how it is we're policed and how it makes us feel in these workplaces, you know? It's not always, I actually had a similar conversation with the coworker, and we were talking about hair, and she's like, you know, Michelle, as a non-Black person, sometimes it makes me uncomfortable to ask a Black woman about her hair, because I've had experiences where I've asked and the person didn't want to share, and I was like, as she should, like, you don't know what other people's experiences are, you don't know what other people's trauma is. So like, if she didn't want to disclose that, she had every right to that, right? So I just wanted to like definitely empower everybody. You don't have to be the advocate or the spokesperson for Black hair for our like non-Black counterparts. That's number one, right? And then also, I was challenging her like, well, what information or research have you done to help inform your knowledge or open your mind around Black hair? You know, so you have to do the work too. And I think I am going to close it there and like, you know, open it up for any questions.
Thank you very much. Do you have a question from the floor? Yes, thank you.
I can see the Oh, right. Good evening. So, the question is, in how any of the panelists have dealt with persons who are trying to manage potential negative feedback even within the community, even in their own family, amongst their own circles, when you choose to wear your hair natural, and it may be, you might be the only one in your family that has the quote-unquote guts to do that, and you're chastised that it doesn't look neat, it doesn't look professional, where you're going looking like that, you're gonna embarrass us, things like that, and how that conversation is important even within our own community, not necessarily externally.
I'd like to share. So, I went natural in 2016, I big chopped, and I was the first woman in my household, so that includes, well, my former household, I live alone now, but that included my mom and my younger sister. And not that my mom supports all my choices. I've worn my hair any way that you could think of. But when I told her that I was gonna cut my hair and go natural, immediately she asked me why. You know, it's gonna be a lot of work. You know, who's gonna do your hair? Not me. You know, don't be coming to me to ask you to moisturize your scalp. Like, she went to the complete defense, right? But I was like, you know what, Mom, like, the reality of it, Mom, I don't even know what my real hair texture looks like or feels like, because I've had a relaxer since I was like maybe 9 years old. So how about, let me just do this. So if I want to deal with my kinks, because you couldn't do it, that's on you. But as a grown-up, this is something that I need to do for myself. So just kind of like, I guess, as you're emerging into adulthood, just owning that aspect of like independence and owning your decision to do what you want to do to your hair. A year or two later, my mom and my sister both, like my mom transitioned, she's now fully natural. My sister legit had a moment where she cut her own hair, and now she's natural. So if you're getting negative feedback, you might find that they're just probably projecting their own fears onto you, and you could be the influence over their decision to convert to, or maybe not.
Do we want to open up or questions now? And so we can ask questions of each panelist individually, generally, or what have you.
Again. So I know that in school, people ask to touch my hair, and they ask how long it would take to do my hair. But I don't want to be rude and cut them off or not answer, but I don't know how to deal.
Any of the panelists want to take that? Anyone?
Yeah, I would just say you're not being rude if you ask someone not to touch your hair. Or if you tell someone that you really don't feel comfortable talking about your hair routine. You're learning how to create boundaries as it relates to your body. And just like you might not like somebody touching your skin or touching your lips or your teeth or your nose, you have every right to tell someone that you don't want them to touch their hair, your hair. In turn, if you feel comfortable, then of course you can grant that person permission to do so. But I hope that this helps in terms of just understanding that you have to maintain boundaries, and you have to make sure that if something's not comfortable for you, that you have the ability and the power to speak to that. And so it's completely okay to tell somebody no, thank you.
Would you like?
I was gonna say, I was literally just gonna echo exactly what you just said, Wendy. So if everyone in the room could say with me on the count of 3, we're all gonna say no together. 1, 2, 3. No. How easy was that, right? And so it was a complete sentence, there's a period at the end of that. However, as women and young women especially, we need to feel comfortable saying no. You are 100% entitled to say no to anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, and you should feel confident that that's your choice to say no. And just like Wendy put it so beautifully, say no thank you. If you feel like you might be rude, or if they're your friend, you can say no thank you. I think the questions usually come from ignorance, so I'm sure people asking to touch your hair don't have hair that looks like yours, right? And so sometimes ignorance can come from, an innocent place, they have no clue. And sometimes ignorance can come from a not so nice place. So always feel comfortable with your own boundaries, and you can say no. It's a complete sentence.
And can I exercise moderator privilege and just throw out a question to the panelists real quick? So my question is, I'm going to play devil's advocate in the room. If I'm an attorney representing the employers. And so my question is, for Professor Wendy or whoever wants to come in, but particularly you, Professor Wendy, I'm just wondering, is there space for my clients to have a preference for how they want their clients or their employees to look, be it uniformity, so beautiful, great, at various cultural events, not here, change your hair up one day, next day, but as it relates to my employees, my preference is for a uniform look, or my preference is for straight hair. And by advocating, Professor Green, I'm playing devil's advocate, for the recognition of afros, if you will, is it the scenario then where Black women's afros are being privileged above others, right, given a protection for others who might wear straight hair, or who might actually get the promotion pursuant to what the employee likes. They like straight hair, right? And so I wonder, is there space for me? And so in terms of replying to you, Michelle, who defines professionalism? Well, I'm an employer and it's my business. Or in the case of someone who called me as an attorney and said, listen, this is my dance company, right? And so I teach little Black and brown children how to dance. For this particular ballet performance, I want your hair in a bun. Not an afro, maybe braid if you can get it in a bun, but I want a smooth look, right? So beautiful, great expression, love yourself. But as it relates to me and my preference, either as an employer or for this particular space, is there space for that? And I'd rather really lead it with Professor Wendy, agree, if you will, is that discrimination versus my preference?
That's a good question. It is discrimination. Now, whether or not it's going to constitute unlawful discrimination, that's another question. Anytime that you're exercising a privilege and it's resulting in some kind of adverse employment decision, that is just the definition of discrimination, right? So a lot of times, courts, for example, don't recognize natural hair discrimination or other forms of grooming code discrimination as discrimination, but they're definitely couching it exactly as you're talking about it in terms of employer prerogative. And so I guess the lawyerly answer would be, it depends. It depends on which jurisdiction you're in, for example. There are, as it relates to natural hair discrimination, or when you're talking about what is the effect of that, the result of that is basically imposing a straight hair expectation or mandate or pressure upon African-descended women in particular, and possibly forcing them to either engage in chemical relaxants, extreme heat styling, wig weaves, so forth, to do that. Or in the case of African-descended men, you're talking about possibly cutting off or covering your hair, right? So it depends. Under federal jurisprudence right now, then yes, most of the federal courts who have decided these types of issues have said that employer prerogative has all power, and that you have limitless power, essentially, almost limitless power to impose that kind of preference upon African-descended workers and other people of color as it relates to their grooming and their appearance. That being said, in some jurisdictions that have passed this kind of legislation, that kind of preference or that employer prerogative is limited because there are certain limited circumstances where the employer has to demonstrate some kind of bona fide safety or health reason. And that means that it can't be pretextual. It has to be something that is substantiated through evidence. And also in legislation that I've worked on, we've also imposed an accommodation requirement where employers have to engage in, conversations similar like in a religious accommodation context, that you have to engage in conversations to ensure that that person doesn't have to cut off their hair if there is a bona fide safety or health reason, but rather really try to ensure that they can maintain their hairstyle and possibly pin it up or cover it in a way that still allows them to perform the duties at hand without imposing any kind of safety and health implications. So it really just depends in terms of which jurisdiction you're in as it relates to what extent the employer prerogative is going to be limited or the employer prerogative is going to be limitless. So there's that. In terms of the second question about whether or not the federal jurisprudence today is actually imposing some kind of a privilege as it relates to African-descended men or women who are wearing afros, I would say no. In part because I would say it is, I guess, relatively a greater privilege as it relates to vis-a-vis those who are wearing braids, locks, or twists. But I wouldn't say that is necessarily a greater privilege than those or greater level of protection as it relates to workers writ large. So what I will say with respect to all of this, though, is that what this legislation is really trying to do is that even though it's very much shaped by African-descended experiences with respect to natural hair discrimination in all of its forms, whether it's afros, locks, braids, twists, banjo-knots, and so forth, what it is doing, like all of our civil rights legislation, is ensuring that there's equal treatment under the law for everyone, and that everyone is going to be protected against racial discrimination on the basis of hairstyles and hair textures that are associated with their racial identity.
Thank you, Professor Adrian. Or Rebecca, if you'd like to add?
So I was just going to add, because again, with my background working for beauty brands, a part of my role is model casting, right? And so I think to your point about this question of playing devil's advocate is it comes down to the job description. Can someone do this job regardless of their hair type, right? Can you close your eyes and you're thinking of Ariel, the Little Mermaid, right? And what are the first words that come to your head? She's got red hair, she's a mermaid, she's swimming. she's got this flounder friend, and like maybe a seagull, but straight typically never comes up in that description, right? You can have someone who can perform with vocals and incredible accent and doesn't need to have straight hair. If I'm creating a new hair care product, let's say a shampoo as a general example, and this shampoo is specific to curly hair, and I'm looking through models and I'm trying to figure out who I want, I put out a very specific brief. I say, maybe I want a model who is not super skinny. I want an average size model. Maybe I want a plus size model. Maybe I'm looking for an older model. And specifically to market a hair care product, this shampoo is for curls. So if I find a model that I love and she has beautiful curly hair, she's a black woman, and I bring her in for a casting call, and she has braids in, and she just spent 12 plus hours getting her braids installed the day before, it is up to her to decide, this job calls for curls. I need someone who's going to model with curls. You have beautiful curls. If you feel comfortable undoing all that work that she just did, I would love to hire you. However, if you do not want to take out those braids, you do not meet the brief of what I'm hiring for, because I cannot promote a product for curls, for shampoo, to really lather and show curls and really get all the photography that I want if you don't want to take out those braids. So I think, to your point, going back to it, it really comes down to, can this person do the job that I'm hiring them for? And at the end of the day, you should be hiring the best person for the job, regardless of, skin color specifically.
I think we could, yeah.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm trying to craft a question in my head, but I do have a little story before I get to my question. So I've been natural since 1994, and I have to tell you, most of the hair discrimination that I've faced has been by Black women. I went to HBCU, and before I could do my student teaching, I was told that I had to straighten my hair. Of course, I didn't. When I graduated from school, I came back home and I worked at a local restaurant, and I was told by people that I worked for that looked like me that I had to change my hair. And of course, I quit. So I don't know how to feel about the Brown Act, to be honest with you. Because litigating my hair, litigating anything, you can change law, right? At any moment, right now we have a group of people in the House of Representatives that are the majority, that if they had it their way, they would change the law, right? So I'm just wondering, is it that we need other people that don't look like us, to accept our hair, or do we need to accept each other? The other thing I wanted to say was, I think that it was Oprah Winfrey's hairdresser that labeled
Andre Walker, yeah.
So I have a problem with that too, in that A, you get an A, that's the best, right? The 4A is the curlier, looser hair, whereas the 4C or the 4D is the more coarse hair. Whereas when you go to beauty school, that level of hair description is not actually there, it's not pronounced as, the descriptors are not 4A, 4B, 4C, or whatever. It is coily hair, kinky hair, those are the names that you use. So I know that you're in the industry, so if you can, have them use the proper wording for that, that would be great. And just lastly, Unilever has history of enslavement, and I know they're trying to change their image, obviously, and that's probably why they're, into black hair care, whatever the case may be. But their history is very, very brutal. I'm from Nigeria, and so I know that, they were the company, if you will, that sold Nigeria to the British. So I stopped using Dove for that reason, but I see where they're going, and I totally understand that. So anyway, I could go on and on, but I just don't know how to feel about the Brown Act. I understand why it has to exist, the same way Black History Month has to exist, but I don't know if there's a question in there.
Can I build on that one question?
Yeah.
So part of it in terms of moving forward with Black hair movement, I wonder, it could be an either or, both and. So is our movement really not necessarily a legal one, but a consumer one, particularly in this call-out culture. So if Unilever, what have you, slavery involvement, or you don't appeal to me as a market or what have you, then we won't buy your products. And so while I don't know if so the question is then, like I said, what is, especially the younger generation, y'all call out, well, y'all be doing on TikTok and all that other stuff, they will respond because it affects the bottom line. So I don't know if they, just to your point, is that it's philanthropic and I'm feeling your beauty too, Black women, or is it more they've now recognized a buying market, so how can I appeal to them? So let me change my advertisement, whatever, so y'all take to the streets, and you're using the streets of the internet. So I guess I would ask you,
I'm happy to
if
jump
I can
in.
add one more question?
Yeah.
I would itching to ask this. So sellout, it goes to the sellout point.
Yeah.
I'm one of them folks, man, I feel offended. Because one, you convinced me, Bayel and Carol's daughter, I'll take it back, to pay $45 for some shampoo. When I could have went somewhere else before this movement and bought it for $5. I'm Luster Silk, y'all know of the Gen X generation where they cost that much. But Bronner Brothers had a little black on the side, it was black owned, at least it was black owned, I know it, I paid. So you got me to buy it, Carol's daughter or my founders, to purchase that, and then you base it on it being natural and organic, and so I bought it, I paid $50 for it, and then you sold it, thereby abandoning the brand by which you got me to purchase it. Like, can you stay into the conversations about the product? Because now the product's watered down. You go to Carol's store at Target, it doesn't feel the same. The black vanilla, the shampoo, it don't feel the same. So the very brand that you pulled me in to purchase is not the same. So I wonder for those coming up behind, we don't trust y'all, because we know it's a matter of time before you sell out. Or abandon.
All right, there's a lot there, so I'm gonna try my best to kind of hop through all the things. First, thank you for sharing your story and sharing your experiences. Also, second, I will say I no longer work for Unilever, so I'm not a representative. I can't support everything that they've ever done. However, I'll quote Oprah, because you brought her up, and she has a famous quote that says, when you know better, you do better. Actually, honestly, that might be Maya Angelou, and I think Oprah quoted Maya Angelou. But we'll mention both of them at this point. And so I think that quote, when you know better, you do better, right? It's the sense of awakening and really listening and reacting and trying to be a force for good, trying to improve. And so that's kind of the key component that I think is important, right? Are we headed in the right direction? Is there an awareness and an understanding of, we don't like this, you did wrong, understand what you did wrong, and do better. And so now to your point about, social media, there are companies who have the ability to listen so much more closely and so much more quickly when they do something wrong that maybe offends someone, when they do something wrong that maybe isn't coming across the right way, and focusing on how can we do better. I'll go back to your comment about sellout as well, because I think that's a fair call out. Because from a natural perspective, right, cost is something that not everybody understands. So if you're creating a product that has synthetic ingredients, that has more chemicals inside of it, you can get efficacious, right, results that work by using cheaper ingredients. If you want to use natural ingredients, they cost more money to put inside of a formula. They're much more expensive. So natural ingredients can also be efficacious, but the shampoo is going to cost more money to make it with natural ingredients than it is with artificial ingredients. And so from a business perspective, if I'm going to sell you something, I need to make sure that I don't lose money in selling you something. I need to make sure that I price it appropriately so that A, I can have a healthy business, but also B, elasticity, right? So I don't know if there's any economics majors out here, but supply and demand, right? So elasticity essentially says, how much can I price this for people to believe that there's a willingness to pay? If you increase the prices of something, eventually people are going to stop buying it. And so it comes down to a statistical analysis to understand what is the right price point for me to have a healthy business where I can pay my employees' salaries, where I can give them raises, where we can grow the business and create more products and scale to different stores or countries and expand distribution. but also not charge too much so that people feel like I'm robbing them blind, that they're not getting their money's worth out of their products, so that they're not gonna stop buying my products and start trying another brand as well. And so to your point about acquisition and changing ingredients and formulas, I cannot defend every single company and every single brand and say that that hasn't happened, but what I can say is that the ingredients inside of products are carefully monitored. There is specific regulations that need to be processed to understand what's in your product needs to be listed appropriately, and sometimes that changes. I was working at DevaCurl and we had this amazing repair shampoo and conditioner that happened to have a common ingredient with the COVID vaccine. And it was a specific preservative that essentially made sure that this ingredient, that the actual shelf life stabilization was solid, that it lasted 12 plus months after it was being opened. Once the COVID vaccine was developed with this preservative, there was what's called a force majeure, which means not one person in the entire world can buy that ingredient anymore because it was owned by the government. So we had to change all of our formulations for every single shampoo and every single conditioner and find a way to make this product as good, if not better than it was before, while changing the ingredients. So ingredients can change from a cost perspective if the price of rosemary goes up, if the price of shea butter goes up, and looking for an alternative to make sure that we don't have to charge you more for it. Or ingredients could change for a bunch of different reasons as well, and it could very well be watering down the formulas for profitability, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Professor Green.
No, I just wanted to say, like, just to really just commend individuals, or I can't see you all, but for raising a really important point in terms of what I call is equal opportunity discrimination. So it's not a group within the African-descended community, people of color community, broadly speaking. We too can be perpetrators of this kind of bias, these negative biases that are associated with natural hair. And alternatively, we can have negative biases as it relates to straight hair, right? And then that result in certain types of policing and prejudice and discrimination. So I think it's really important that as we're talking about this subject matter, that there's a lot of work that has to happen within our communities, and with that also takes a lot of work that happens within ourselves. So for me, yes, legislative change, legal change is really important, policy change is really important, but I think what is equally, if not more important, is that personal change, that personal transformation, that hopefully we won't be having these conversations, we won't be having this advisement within our families and our interpersonal relationships that then spread out into these other spaces that are so central to not only who we are, but how we're participating in being included in so many different spaces throughout broader society. So I just wanted to really uplift that. Really important to talk about some of the, it's kind of like airing the dirty laundry, but we have to be really real with ourselves too, that we can't put it on everybody else in terms of, oh, they're discriminating against us, we do it to ourselves. And there has to be some, and I think so much of this conversation, one thing about the legislation and other forms of change, whether it be policy or legal or social change, that it is bringing a level of awareness and introspection and reflection about the biases that we may consciously or unconsciously hold and how we're acting as it relates to making decisions as a result of those kinds of biases, and can possibly serve as a way to intervene and disrupt those things and dismantle it.
Yeah.
So that's something else I just wanted to raise in terms of, I get it, like, we shouldn't have to have legislation, we shouldn't have to have litigation, but part of why we're here is because individuals like judges and other lawmakers and decision makers have not treated this kind of discrimination for what it is, which is a form of racial discrimination, a long-standing form of racial discrimination over 4 centuries long. And all of this work that we're doing in all of these different spaces is trying to really dismantle 4 centuries of lawful racial discrimination.
Okay, thank you, Professor Green. And so just quickly, since we only have 4 minutes left, I did want to piggyback on what Rebecca was saying by reminding us it is our responsibility as consumers to not paint things with a broad brush, right? We have to be able to distinguish when someone truly is selling out versus when they are selling in, right? I thought that was a really great point that you brought up, Rebecca. So really paying attention. Are they staying with the company? Are they still trying to protect the markets that they were initially intending to serve? And so, Sarah, I want us to end with a student question, please.
Hello again. On the topic of personal styling, which is of course this conversation is an extension of, Michelle A. Grayson has organized a fashion show and a pop-up shop as you all are preparing for the Career Center's Career Fair on March 15th. And I just wanted to plug it while we're here. So the pop-up shop and the fashion show is on Wednesday, March 8th. And if you need pieces, items to prepare you for the career fair on the 15th, please come by. I have the event with the QR code, so if you want to scan it, see me, okay? I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. It's also on Handshake too.
Yes.
We'll go back to Sarah.
I'm actually not going to ask a specific question. I'm actually not going to ask a specific question. I just want to reflect the things that I've taken in, because it's much sound like being a career. I'm wondering like different things I didn't even think about how to like define my own professionalism, or how to even think about how I'm being perceived by others. Because I feel like in our generation, we just seem to think that like we can do whatever we want and no one's really gonna come at us with any sort of like negativity or like really like negative thinking. And I've had experiences with my brother. I'm just like, oh, like this hair is his hair, like let him be himself. But then you have like people looking at him like, oh, like he's unkept, he's not, you know, so he doesn't look like a respectful young boy. And I just think a lot of things were highlighted and brought to my attention. I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and I just want to thank our panelists for being here today. Coming in on Zoom and speaking words of wisdom. Rebecca coming in with your experience of work and how your experience has defined you and how you're out of industry. And Michelle as well as how you know, here in the workplace kind of shows, but changes perspective and changes your outlook on how you come to it or how you present yourself.
Well, thank you everyone. Oh, hi. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Wendy, Professor Green, and wrap it up. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your very, very busy schedule. Thank you, Megan. Okay, and thank you very much as well.